Jervaulx Abbey was founded in the 12th century and it became one of the great Cistercian abbeys of Yorkshire. The abbey made its wealth from agriculture and cheese making, with the monks of Jervaulx introducing cheese making into the Wensleydale region. The Cistercian monks were known as a new breed of monks by the Benedictine monks. Where the Benedictines wore dark robes, the Cistercians wore undyed robes, hence their nickname of the White Monks. They wanted to reform the monastic system and return to a simpler and more self-sufficient way of life. They lived by the rules of silence, seclusion, prayer and agricultural labour. The Cistercians dominated Yorkshire because their emphasis on manual labour created a demand for sheep and crops, and the fields of Yorkshire could provide that.
We have this vision of the monks and the abbot living a very simple, quiet life of prayer, but in reality, the abbeys generated great wealth, selling food produce, wool and metalwork.
At the heart of the abbey was the church. Now, each day began well before dawn with the sound of bells calling the monks here for prayer. They followed a structured routine of chanting the divine office and attending mass, and they would gather here 7 times a day. And after attending the morning mass, the monks would then go about their daily duties, which for the monks of Jervaulx Abbey was mainly agricultural labour.
Next to the church was the cloister, the communal heart of the abbey. It would have been a tranquil space, surrounded by covered walkways. The monks would gather here for reading, discussions and recreation, as well as studying religious texts. In many monasteries, manuscripts were written in the cloister, as they had the advantage of being roofed with plenty of light.
The chapter house is where the daily business of a monastery was carried out, and it was the second most important building here after the church. The monks would gather here after morning mass and they'd be allocated their weekly duties. They would listen to reports about the running of the monastery, and after they'd finished here, the monks could then go to the parlour, which is one of the very few places in the monastery that the monks could speak to each other.
We're now in the refectory, and the refectory served as a dining hall where the monks had to eat in silence.
They did, and so to overcome this, the monks developed quite an extensive system of using signs to represent words so that they could communicate their needs or even converse with each other without actually having to break their vow of silence.
It must have looked like some farcical stage show with all the hand waving and gestures, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I imagine it would. It would have been all over the place with everybody waving their hands around as they tried to communicate with each other. One of them I do know, and I'm guessing the abbot would have used this at the beginning of the meal, would have been this one.
To sit down?
Yeah, to be seated, yeah, it's something that you may still do today, and the opposite of that when the meal is finished is that you would have this.
All rise.
Exactly.
Simple, easy
yes.
to understand.
The dormitories provided simple accommodation for the monks to sleep and pray in, and they were expected to observe silence there at all times too. They were often large, rectangular, communal rooms, and the monks would be provided with a simple wooden bed or a pallet to sleep on. Because of their strict schedule, the monks had allocated times for sleeping and waking. And waking for the monks began around 2 a.m. for the first service of the day.
In medieval times, everyone was encouraged to go on pilgrimage at least once in their lifetime, and on completing your journey and reaching your abbey of choice, a donation of coin would be given. There was also competition between abbeys to acquire the best holy relics to attract the pilgrim masses.
Scandal struck the abbey in 1279 when Philip, the abbot of Jervaulx, was murdered. Now, his successor, Abbot Thomas, was accused of complicity, but he was acquitted by a jury. The crime was laid solely at the feet of one of the monks, and he'd already fled the abbey, which is just as well because he was outlawed for his crime. A major rebellion took place in the north of England in 1536, and it was known as the Pilgrimage of Grace. The north of England rose up in protest against Henry VIII and Thomas Cromwell, particularly against the religious reforms, the destruction of the religious houses and Cromwell's policies in general. As the rebellion gained momentum, the Abbot of Jervaulx, Abbot Sedbar, found himself caught up in it. When the rebel army arrived at Jervaulx Abbey wanting the abbot to take the oath supporting the Pilgrimage of Grace, the abbot very reluctantly agreed. But when Henry VIII started rounding up and arresting the rebel leaders, Abbot Sedbar fled the abbey and he sought sanctuary with Lord Scrope at Bolton Castle. But the King's commissioners followed him there, and Abbot Sedbar was arrested. He was taken to the Tower of London. He was hung, drawn and quartered for his treason, with his head displayed on London Bridge. It's still possible to see the spot in the Tower of London where Abbot Sedbar carved his name in his prison wall. The destruction of Jervaulx Abbey under Henry VIII's religious reforms was particularly savage. Not only was its last abbot hung for treason, the abbey was stripped of its lead and its valuables, and the buildings were destroyed at the hands of the king's men. Jervaulx Abbey in its heyday would have created feelings of awe and wonder. And whilst traditional monastic life as it was in the Middle Ages may have waned, some Cistercian communities remain today, including Caldey Abbey on Caldey Island in Pembrokeshire, a holy island in Britain, where the Cistercian monks continue their tradition of prayer and quiet living on a remote island.